Today I want to start with a scenario and a question. You can either answer the question in your mind or you can type it out in the comment section. And I'm honestly interested in the answer to this one. I want you to imagine that there is a attractive woman standing at a bar. Kind of a very typical scenario you might see in a film or a TV show. She's standing alone and a man who presumably is interested in her romantically, sexually, comes to offer to buy her a drink, and maybe she accepts, and they start talking. They get onto the subject of television shows. As young people often do, they talk about what kind of TV shows they like, and the woman says that her favourite TV show is The Gilmore Girls. I now want to branch off the scenario into two sub-scenarios that I want you to compare with each other. In the first scenario, the man says, "Oh, Gilmore Girls, I love that show." In the second scenario, the man says, "Gilmore Girls, that's a trash show. I hate that drama that women watch. It's badly written and I don't like it." With no other information other than that, which of these two responses do you think the woman will find more attractive? Obviously, it's impossible to predict with 100% accuracy. It depends on the woman, depends on the man. Presuming that she was at least somewhat interested in this guy before, do you think him responding positively to her choice of TV show would be more or less attractive than responding negatively? To me, the answer is obvious, and I think a lot of women would probably agree with me on this. Maybe not, I don't know. Mostly my channel and my videos get watched by men though, and I really don't know how much men know about this question. I don't know how intuitively men would agree with a woman's opinion on this. I think the woman would probably respond more positively to the negative reaction to the Gilmore Girls. This guy who is saying that he hates or just mildly dislikes a show that this woman is interested in, I think that response is more attractive than the first response. And it's not because of any particular opinion I have about the Gilmore Girls. I actually quite like the Gilmore Girls. But it's because the second response, the negative response, in my opinion, it's more likely to be accurate because most men don't really like the Gilmore Girls. That's obviously a generalization. It's more likely to be the truth. He's actually demonstrating honesty by saying this. And it's also demonstrating a kind of bravery, a kind of courage. This guy is showing that he's not afraid to disagree with this woman, even though both of them know that they are in the process of courting right now. The man is not afraid to challenge this woman, to disagree with her and risk offending her even. So even though he's acting a little bit like a jerk, he's being a little bit mean, he's not being as polite and nice as he could be, I think most women would respond better to that compared to the first response, which it could be a completely genuine response. It's hard to know, obviously. With no extra information, we don't know. This could be a completely honest expression of this guy's love for the Gilmore Girls. It's more likely to be a ploy, right? It's more likely to be a tiny white lie that this guy is telling because he wants to continue the conversation in this sort of positive direction. He thinks that it'll impress this woman if he is, if all of their interests are lining up, if he's polite to her, if he says yes to everything that she says. And I think that's something that a lot of guys get wrong. But this isn't a video about dating advice. This is just one scenario. I'm not just talking about men in this video, I want to talk about men and women. And what I want to talk about is moral courage. The scenario that I laid out at the start, on a micro scale, demonstrates the difference between having moral courage and having no moral courage. I was thinking about this when I was listening to one of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life lectures that he uploaded to his podcast recently. It's not on YouTube yet, and I can't actually find the clip, I'm afraid. But he was talking about the show Breaking Bad, and he was talking about The Hobbit as well. He was on one of his sort of rants about hero archetypes and about what it means to be a hero, especially for a man. At the start of the show Breaking Bad, for perhaps the first episode, or maybe even the first season to some extent, the main character, Walter White, is not a courageous person. He's not virtuous. You may think that he's an innocent, good person because he's not committing any crimes and he's not hurting anybody. He's not vicious or violent like he kind of becomes later. But when we look at his arc as a character, we see that he wasn't restraining himself from vicious acts out of any kind of moral principle or virtue. It was more like a kind of cowardice. There's a big difference between someone who has the courage and the strength to act violently, but who chooses not to out of their own moral principles. Somebody who is choosing to be a good person and understands the difference between good acts and evil acts. The difference between that kind of person, what I would call a hero, and someone who is merely a coward. Someone like Walter White at the start of the show. Due to the law enforcement in most modern countries, and also the social pressure of that we've developed in our civilization, it's heavily disincentivized to be cruel and violent and vicious. And to comply with those laws and social customs is the path of least resistance for most people. To have an easy life in a modern society, it's better if you don't act mean-spirited, violent, towards anyone in your life. You'd be better off to keep your head low, be polite, be agreeable, and go along with whatever the social customs are. And there's actually not much that's wrong with that if you live in a society that encourages good behaviour. But there's also nothing virtuous about that. There's no decision that you're making based on your own morals. You're not being brave. You're not making moral decisions. You're just doing what is in your own best interest. You're doing the easiest thing. I think that describes the vast majority of people, myself included. I'm going to use the word coward to describe these people, including myself, but I don't mean that to be particularly pejorative. I'm not using it in a positive light, but I consider that to be the neutral starting point for everybody, is to be a coward, to be self-serving to some extent, and to perhaps care about your family and people you care about, but not to have any lofty moral principles that you are willing to risk your life for, or risk. You're not willing to actually risk anything to protect your moral principles. That is what I would consider the default state for a human being to be. But just to clarify what I'm talking about, I'm going to call that default state a coward. When you're surrounded by what I would call healthy social conventions and laws and good law enforcement, you can get by pretty well being a coward. There's nobody asking you to act immorally. It's only when you take a person like that and put them into a dangerous situation, or maybe if you turn the whole society's rules upside down, like what happened in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. If you take the same people and you put them in a place where there's none of the same layers of social customs and laws, the things that keep us all safe. When all of those systems that we live in are stripped away, such as in a kind of a post-apocalyptic scenario, or like I said, in a totalitarian regime, or maybe you can imagine a Lord of the Flies type scenario if you're shipwrecked on a desert island with some other people, with none of the systems in place to keep you safe and to enforce the rules. What kind of person would you be? How would you treat other people? If you're being pressured by everybody around you and your own government to act immorally, how would you react to that? I think most people would probably cave under the pressure. They wouldn't be able to maintain their own moral principles. And that's been demonstrated throughout history whenever these sorts of situations do happen. But even without any major changes to the structure of society, we do encounter these little pockets of chaos in regular life quite a lot. anytime that you've ever been mugged or threatened or attacked by either a stranger or somebody you know, you're entering into a situation where the rules of society have broken down at least somewhat. An example of this that came to mind was an episode of Louie that I saw a while ago. Louie is the TV show made by Louis C.K. that's kind of autobiographical. It's a comedy, but it's also kind of a tragedy. It's a really great show, actually. It's very honest and kind of sad as well. There's one episode where he's on a date with a woman, and while they're on the date, they're trying to have a conversation, and they get approached by these kind of teenage thugs, and these teenagers are kind of physically intimidating him. And in order to avoid a confrontation with these thugs, Louis has to humiliate himself in front of the woman.
Maybe you'll ask me nicely, and I'll still beat the shit out of you. Maybe I won't. So what do you say, Louie?
Please don't. What do you want me to...
Don't what?
Don't kick my ass, okay?
I don't like how you said that.
Why? What?
Ask nice. Ask better. It was fake. Ask again. Now.
Okay. Please don't kick my ass, okay? You're very strong and young. I get it. You could kick my ass. I'm sure you could. So I'm really asking you nicely to please not kick my ass, okay?
By all accounts, that is absolutely the right thing to do. The rational thing to do is to avoid that confrontation. Nothing's being lost except a little bit of Louis's pride, so that's probably... It would be completely reckless for Louis to have to have called their bluff and maybe got into a fight with them. It would have been a much worse night for both Louis and his girlfriend, the woman he's on a date with. And yet the woman admits to Louis that she finds what he did very unattractive. She finds him less appealing as a sexual prospect now that she's seen him humiliate himself in front of these thugs. And she explains that she understands that it was the right thing to do and it was completely rational and she knows why he does it, and yet she can't help this loss of attraction that she feels towards him. And I think there's some truth in that, and there's some tragedy in that as well. In this scenario, there's no good way out for Louis. There's nothing he could have done in that situation that would have resulted in winning the respect of this woman, since if he had tried to fight these guys, he definitely would have gotten beaten up. I suppose if he'd called their bluff and they were bluffing, then he would have come out on top, but all things considered, that would be a bad bet to make. But in that moment, I think what Louis is revealing to this woman that she's finding unattractive, he's revealing that he's willing to let these bad guys, these thugs, he's willing to let them get away with treating them badly. He's willing to let this injustice stand and to beg them for mercy just to save his own skin. And although in this specific micro scenario that's going on, that was the right thing to do, you can imagine on a mass scale, on the scale of an entire society, that kind of behaviour would result in tyrants, basically. If tyrants like these teenage thugs were just allowed to do whatever they want out of fear, what kind of world would we live in without anybody standing up to these bullies? Being nice isn't worth anything in a dangerous situation where the lives and the well-being of your family is threatened. When the moral fabric of society is threatened, being a nice guy is worth absolutely nothing. And that's why I think we, as a society, but especially women when choosing male partners, they look for courage over niceness, you could say. A nice guy could just be servile, basically. He could be pathetic. He could be a coward. Being nice is, it could just be a sign of cowardice. Being mean, being somewhat aggressive, is at the very least a demonstration of some kind of courage. And although it's not a virtuous kind of courage, I think virtue is easier to teach a man or a person than bravery. It's easier to take a strong man who's a bit of a jerk and turn him into a good guy who's still strong and brave. It's easier to do that than it is to take a weak, pathetic coward and turn him into a strong guy. The way I kind of think of it is like a kind of 3-step process. That's what Jordan Peterson was talking about with The Hobbit. Bilbo Baggins, he starts off as a nice guy. He's a cute little hobbit and he lives in a hole and he's a nice functioning member of the Hobbiton society. But he's not capable of any dangerous acts. He's not capable of being dangerous at all. The second step is being a thief for Bilbo. He becomes a bit of a rogue character. He has to become immoral to demonstrate, to build up his own bravery, to build his courage. He has to forsake that kind of niceness that he had before. He's no longer the nice guy. He's this kind of almost like an anti-hero. That's an exaggeration, but he becomes a thief. He has to enter into the realm of immorality so that he can then ascend to the third step, which is being actually virtuous, to have the ability to be dangerous, to be a thief, and to choose not to be a thief. It's a world of difference from being a coward who has no other way of being. Someone who's being nice because that's the only thing they know how to do. That's the only thing they're capable of. And so, from appearances, step 1, the nice guy, it's pretty similar looking to step 3, the hero. In most normal circumstances, it's only when push comes to shove, so to speak, when you're actually called to action, that's the only time you can find out whether you are actually capable of being dangerous, of being courageous. And in that scene in Louie, Louie is revealing to this woman that he's not a step 3. He's not a hero. He's a coward. Now that's a fictionalized version of Louis C.K. I don't know if it's based on a real thing that happened to him or not, but I actually don't think that Louis is a coward based on his real life actions. I won't go into it too much now, but if you listened to the leaked audio of his latest stand-up, I think it's pretty obvious that he's not a coward. Courage doesn't just have to mean standing up to a physical assault from a bully. In the times we're living in, I think it's important that we can recognize that to be brave is to speak the truth, is to speak our minds, and to risk our own reputations and maybe even our jobs or our social standing in order to maintain what we believe is the truth, and to use our speech to be courageous rather than our fists. If the time ever comes that my government forces me to say things that I don't believe and to pretend to have opinions that I don't actually have, I hope that I will have the courage to say what I really think. Even on this channel, I try to say what I think is important, and yet I do hold things back. That's why I call myself a coward, is because there are things I won't say on this channel. There are opinions I have that I think I could make a video about that I don't want to, because I'm afraid that I'll be called this or that, or that my boss will find out, and that it'll be difficult for me to find a job. At the moment, making YouTube videos isn't that important, so I feel like I'm not really letting the world down by just keeping my opinions to myself. But I hope that if it does become important, if we really do start falling into a real totalitarian kind of state where it becomes actually illegal to have these opinions, I hope I'll have the courage to stand up for what I think is right. And for me, it's a strange paradox that I'm soon going to have children, I'm going to have a family, I'm going to have a child, and my child is going to need me there to raise her. And yet also it's for her sake that I need to make sure I need to do my part to keep this country safe for her, to keep this society free. And maybe that sounds way overdramatic, and at the moment I think it probably is a bit too dramatic, but I don't think it's impossible that we could be seeing some kind of civil unrest in the future, if we're talking about the next 50 years. I'm going to try to become more courageous. That's my new ambition for life, is to be a courageous person. As Jordan Peterson says, I want to be the person who'd be able to stand up to the Gestapo if they came to my door asking for whatever. I want to be the kind of person who would refuse to participate in the Nazi regime or the Soviet Union, because discussing my dissenting opinion with my friends and my family behind closed doors in private, where I'm not in danger, that's not bravery. That's not going to be that helpful. And even posting videos anonymously online that's not brave, and it's not going to help much if it actually comes down to it. Anyway, I hope the background noise hasn't been too much of a bother for you. I had to keep the windows open because it is really hot at the moment. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, please let me know what you thought about the video in the comments, and if you have any thoughts surrounding the subject. Until next time, have a good one.
In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys.